In today's video, I am going to show you how I made this scene, which has helped me win over $200 and get second place in a video editing competition. All the assets that I have used in this video are linked in the description below. Let's get straight into it. So, the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna create a new composition. You can name it whatever you want, just make sure the frame rate is set to 30 and the width and height is 1080 by 1920. Then we're gonna add a custom background. We're gonna press Ctrl Y and add a dark green background, just like this. We're then gonna add a dust overlay and make sure it's set to screen. Then we're gonna add a shape layer and just make sure to align it in the center of the screen. You can do this by pressing Ctrl Alt Home and Ctrl Home. You can also do this by pressing on these buttons in the align section. Next, we're going to add a paper overlay over our shape layer. We're then going to go to the track matte whip and pull it over our shape layer. And now we should have this effect on your screen. Once that's done, we're now going to add a new text layer. In this text layer, we're going to write all. And I usually use a guideline to line up the text perfectly. You can do this by holding Shift and moving the text and it will snap onto that line. Now, change the size of the text and write out the rest of the sentence while adjusting the size, font, and capitalization of each word in that sentence. Once that's done, add this Money 3D asset to your scene. This will change the settings of your composition as you can see on the screen. The composition settings will change from Classic 3D to Advanced 3D. Now, adjust the rotation and scale of the Money 3D asset until it looks the way that you like. You can do this by hitting the S and R keys on your keyboard to adjust the scale and rotation of your asset. Next, we will add 2 rotation keyframes. We will then change the rotation of both keyframes so it looks like this. Just make sure to not add a big change in rotation to keep the animation smooth. Once that's done, we're going to add the last text in this scene, which is value. Now just change the font and scale of the text. Right click on the 3D Money asset, hit Pre-Compose and change the name of the composition. You can now change the composition settings back to Classic 3D from Advanced 3D. Select all the text layers, shape layers and pre-compositions and create another pre-comp. This is so it is easier to add the page turn effect to it. Now, to add the animation to the text, we will go to Animate and select Opacity. Then, under Range Selector, change the opacity to 0%. And add 2 keyframes to the start, making sure the first keyframe is set to 0 and the last keyframe is set to 100. Copy the animator and paste it to the rest of the text layers. Now, adjust the keyframes for each text so the text appears in the right order. Finally, we will cut the money composition into multiple layers and we will change the opacity of some of the in-between layers to 0 to add a flicker effect. So, the composition will now look like this. As I previously said, add the page turn effect to the paper composition and add a keyframe to the fold position setting. Move to the front and add another keyframe by moving the controller on the screen. Then add another keyframe so the paper is back to its normal position. And add a final keyframe where the paper is folded to the top left corner. Now, to make the animation smoother, press on the graph editor and highlight all the keyframes. Then, press F9 on your keyboard to add an easy ease effect. Change the graphs so it looks like this. Now, add a text layer and type the words right. And change the font to Go Bold Extra 1. Move it to the center of the screen by pressing Ctrl Home and Ctrl Alt Home on your keyboard. And don't forget to adjust the size of the text. To create the animation of the text, we will go to Animate and select the position effect. Then we will go to Add and select Opacity. Here, make sure the opacity is set to 0%, offset is set to -100%, and position is set to 60. We will now add a keyframe for offset at -100 and then move in front to add another keyframe for 100. Now, go to Advanced and change the shape from square to ramp up. Finally, change the ease high setting to 25% and the ease low setting to 100%. You can now adjust the timing of the keyframes so the animation looks smooth and so the text appears as soon as the page is turned. For the transition between the different scenes, start by adding a circular shape layer. Center it in the middle of the screen by pressing Ctrl Home and Ctrl Alt Home. Then, make sure to place the layer behind the text right. You can also change the name of the shape layer to Circle Background. Next, we will adjust the scale and add 2 keyframes where the first keyframe is set to 0 and the last keyframe is set to 355. This is so it can cover the entire screen. Also, add a deep glow effect to the circle so it looks better. Press on the graph editor and change the graph so it looks like what is on the screen right now. To add some flair to the scene, add a drop shadow to the text layer just so it doesn't look flat. So for our next transition, we're going to start by adding the hand image to our timeline. Press the unlink button next to the scale setting and I will set the first number to -100. This is so I can flip the hand to point to the other direction. Then, while still selecting the hand layer, press on the circle shape layer and add it to the screen. This will add a mask as you can see on the screen. Adjust the mask and then add a slight feather so the image fits better in the scene and doesn't look off. Here, you can lower the opacity of the image to 40% and add a deep glow effect with these settings. Also, don't forget to add a drop shadow just to separate the image from the plain white background. Finally, add 2 keyframes for the image's opacity. The first keyframe should be at 0% and the last one should be at 40%. Also, change the timing of the opacity so the hand appears as soon as the transition starts. Here, I'm rotating the hand so it points more on the top left corner. Next, add a camera to the timeline and make sure to turn the text layer into a 3D layer. We will start by adding a keyframe to the camera's position at this point. Then, we will move to the left and up a bit and add another keyframe there. Once those keyframes are added, add a rectangular shape layer and change the color to light blue. Also, make sure to turn it into a 3D layer as well. Add the text layers and start adjusting the shape. This is so all the text layers fit inside that shape. Also, make sure all the text layers are turned into 3D layers and keep adjusting the layers until it looks like this. Now, add the CC light sweep effect to the rectangular shape layer and adjust the edge intensity to about 100 and the edge thickness to about 6.0. Add a drop shadow with a distance of 10 and softness of 20 to all the text layers. We are almost done. Add a null object to the timeline, parent the camera to the null by using the whip and add a keyframe here. Then move in front and add another keyframe by zooming in into the scene. For the 3D objects, we will add a money bag asset to the timeline. Add it inside the rectangular shape and rotate it a bit so it looks like this. Then, add a rotation keyframe here and go in front and change the rotation to add another keyframe. For the second 3D asset, add a MacBook to the scene and move it under the rectangular shape layer, making sure to also adjust the rotation of the MacBook. Similar to the money bag, we will start adding rotation keyframes so the MacBook does not look boring and is moving all throughout the scene. And just keep adjusting and modifying the layers so it all looks good and the way that you like. Now, for the most important part, highlight the camera layer, null layer and both 3D assets and pre-compose them all. Then, copy the camera and null layer from inside that new pre-comp and paste it back into our original scene. Don't forget to change the 3D render in the composition setting of the original scene back to classic 3D. Finally, add an adjustment layer and add the VR chromatic aberrations effect to it. Change all the aberration values to -1 as you can see here. This will add a red and blue effect to your scene, and this style is kind of the trend right now in the editing scene. Add another adjustment layer, but with the optics compensation effect. Change the field of view to 25 and make sure the reverse lens distortion box is ticked. For our third and final adjustment layer, we will add the posterized time effect to it and change the frame rate to 18 frames per second. We are basically done now. I just forgot to add a drop shadow to the rectangular shape layer in the second scene, as well as a drop shadow to the entire paper pre-comp in the first scene. I use a value of around 40 for the distance and 130 for the softness, and it looks like this. And that's it. If you guys want more videos like this, don't forget to like and subscribe, and don't forget to click on this video on the screen right now to help you edit faster.